What's up, guys? So today, back by popular demand, every one of you has been wanting to see some more welding stuff, and a lot of you guys like the instructional stuff. So what we're going to do today is we're actually going to go over MIG welding versus TIG welding. I saw a couple of questions that asked, a very good question actually, is why would you TIG weld something over MIG welding something? And there's a billion different reasons that I won't get into right now because we could be here forever. But basically it's going to boil down to they're both equally as good of a process when it comes to welding. There are just some times where aesthetically a TIG weld looks better than a MIG weld. It's not to say that if they're not both done properly that they're going to be equally as strong, because that is the case. If you MIG something properly and you TIG something properly, you're going to get the same properties in the weld that you would either way strength-wise. Now, as far as like aesthetics go, a MIG weld is always going to have more of a raised weld than a TIG weld, and you also have a lot less control over the puddle with a MIG welder than you do with a TIG welder. Now, the main difference with these two is literally how the welding filler wire is fed. In MIG welding, if you could see right here, the machine feeds the wire into the weld. So as you've got your two pieces of metal and you're doing your weld, you actually have this wire being fed automatically at a set speed that you set on the welder itself. Now with a TIG welder, you are utilizing the filler rod yourself. So it is actually human fed. You generate the arc with the torch down here, and then you feed your wire into the puddle as you're moving along down the road. Now, this takes a little bit of coordination versus MIG welding. You not only have to create the puddle with the torch and feed the filler wire with your less dominant hand, but you've also got to manipulate a foot pedal to manipulate the amperage of which you're welding at. With a MIG welder, you don't do that. You turn it on, you set a dial or two, and you hit it, and you're good. Now, the other benefit to MIG welding versus TIG welding is that, I don't know if you can see, I cut some of these pieces of steel here. This particular piece, I don't know if you can see all that mill scale that's on there. This is hot rolled steel. It's very scaly, has a little bit of rust on it and everything else. Now the MIG is going to penetrate right through that without much of an issue. You may get a little bit of porosity in the weld, you might get a little something, but overall the MIG is going to power through that mill scale and be able to weld your base metal. With a TIG welder, not so much. TIG welder with all that mill scale on there, you're going to get some really nasty effects with your weld. This metal needs to be ultra clean in order for you to get a perfect TIG weld on it. And you'll see that as we go along. We'll do a couple different things here and there. Now, why would you use one over the other? Again, perfect example, and then we'll get into the welding. If you've got a dump truck and you're out in the field and you have the choice to use a MIG or a TIG, which with the new multi-process machines, they're portable, yada yada. You have the choice to use either one, but you don't have a grinding wheel or a flap disc or anything available to clean the metal that you need to repair. All you have is, let's just say, a file and a piece of sandpaper. Well, then you're going to want to use the MIG welder, because the MIG will allow you to penetrate anything that's on that metal. The paint, whatever. Your weld's not going to be perfect, but you will penetrate into that metal. With a TIG welder, you will barely even be able to strike an arc and get it to be consistent enough to weld it. Now, if you're in the shop like we are here today, and you're welding an exhaust, or you're welding a cross member, or you're welding something else like that, and you have the access to the TIG welder, I always usually use the TIG welder. Just because, in my opinion, the welds look nicer, they're flatter, there's not as much metal put in. I can control exactly how hot the piece gets, how not hot the piece gets, and all that stuff. So when it comes to the difference between the two, that's the main differences. Now, from a newbie standpoint, from a beginner standpoint, this is where things are going to get ultra complicated, because with a MIG welder, you can go to Harbor Freight or Sears or Lowe's or Home Depot. You can pick yourself up a halfway decent MIG welder for, $200-300. You put a roll of wire in it, you put some gas behind it, or even some flux core wire with no gas. You put the thing down, you hit the button, and in 20 or 30 minutes you can stick two pieces of metal together. And then, you know what, over the course of 2-3 months of you welding on a regular basis, you become a pretty damn good MIG welder. TIG welding, on the other hand, before you even pick up this torch, there are mounds and mounds and mounds of things you need to know. What tungsten size do I use? What cup size do I use? Do I use ceramic? Do I use Pyrex? Do I use a long back cap, a short back cap? Am I using a number 20 torch, a number 9 torch, a number 17 torch? Is it liquid cooled? Is it air cooled? What kind of gases do I use? What am I going to use? A gas lens or just a normal, gas diffusion setup? Am I going to use 3/32 filler rod? Am I going to use 1/8 inch? Am I going to use 16th or 40 thousandths or 30 thousandths? There are a million different things you need to know when you first start TIG welding. It will make your head spin. I know I was like that when I first started. I had no clue where to look. So there is a huge learning curve when it comes to learning how to TIG weld versus learning how to MIG weld. MIG welding, you can pick it up pretty quick. TIG welding, you're going to need a lot of background information before you can even pick up the torch and start TIGging. And that's just for mild steel. When it gets into doing aluminum, titanium, magnesium, anything that you're welding on AC, it gets even more complicated. So it all depends on what you're looking to do. Most of the time, 90% of the time, MIG welding is just fine for most people, until you have the need to do aluminum, and then everybody wants an AC/DC TIG machine so that you can do aluminum with it. But there are options for MIG welders for doing aluminum, and we won't get into those today. All right, so now that you have a little bit of background on the differences between the two, what we're going to do today is we've got these 4 pieces of metal. Thanks, Logan Steel. You guys are always hooking it up in the bargain barn. 4 pieces of metal. I left them dirty on one side, semi-clean on the other. So what we're going to do basically is we're going to MIG one of these, we're going to TIG one of these. I'm going to do a little bit of MIG and TIG on one so you can see the 2 welds side by side. Hopefully that'll give you an idea of why we use TIG versus MIG. And yeah, so let's get to it. I'm going to try to get you guys in as close as I possibly can without destroying my camera. And we'll start now, so let's get to it. Alright, so we're going to tack both of these together with the MIG welder. Just do them quick. Alright, so first piece we're going to do is this little guy here. We're actually going to MIG weld that inside corner joint right there, and we'll show you what it looks like when we're done. Here we go. Get something to grab this here so I don't go, oh my god, it's hot. Alright, so as you guys can see with that one, that is actually a pretty decent looking MIG weld. Now mind you, this metal has a lot of porosity, a ton of mil scale still on it, and that weld came out pretty decent for a MIG weld. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over. We'll weld that side, which is horribly, horribly rusted, and we'll see how that weld comes out. as you can see, even with zero prep, that MIG weld still comes out pretty damn good. It penetrates through the metal. We basically have no difference other than a couple little, I don't know how well you're going to be able to see that, but a couple little spots in there where some of the contaminants came through. But that's the side that was prepped. That's the side that was not prepped, and they look almost identical. Alright, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to take this larger piece here, and we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do half of it MIG welded, half of it TIG welded, so that you can see what the difference looks like. And then we'll do it again on a prep side and a non-prep side. Alright, so this one, we're going to start out TIG welding this one. We're using a number 12 M-Furic Pyrex cup. This one's about seeing better days, but our stick out on our electrode is probably about a ½ inch. We've got about 25 CFH of argon, 20-25 CFH of argon. We're going to be using about 160 to 180 amps, and we're using a 3/32 filler rod. Mild steel. I think it's ER70S something or other. Alright, so here we go. Alright guys, so on this one, we actually use two different techniques, so I could show you that. See if I can grab this so I can show you. Alright, so the technique right here is basically me dabbing the wire in little by little so I can ultimately control every bit of heat input, every bit of wire input and everything. And I don't know if you can see how flat that weld is laying. There's virtually no buildup in there whatsoever. And then this one on this side here, I actually did a lay wire technique. Now the lay wire technique, basically, when I started this one here, I was basically going dab, 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 dab. On this side over here, I leave it in the puddle and just run the actual torch over top of the filler wire as well while feeding it in to make sure there's some there. So what you get is a little bit more buildup on this side. You get a little bit more substantial weld material in here. And it can technically be a little bit stronger because there's more weld, but I like to do it this way because you can see I can control the heat input, get the colors I'm looking for, and everything else. So what we're going to do now is I'm actually going to flip this around. This is the side that was not prepped. This side here is definitely going to get interesting trying to weld that, because not only is there slag from the plasma cutter but there's all kinds of other stuff, and we'll probably see it in the weld. So I'm going to weld that now with the TIG. And then we're going to flip back over, and I'm going to lay a bead in between the two TIG beads with the MIG so you can see the actual bead difference. Alright, so here we go, guys. Perfect example of a surface that was not prepped and what happens. Now you could see all the black dark material that's in there is all contaminants in that weld. You could also see a couple of crater holes, a few other odds and ends that happen. That's because I didn't clean the metal. Now there's that versus the weld on that side, which is the lay wire technique one, and you can see the difference already. That versus unprepped versus totally unprepped MIG weld. So you can see that the MIG welder was much better able to blow through all this stuff than the TIG welder was. Alright, so now we're going to finish off this piece and pretty much this video by doing a weld right here in between these two TIG welds so that you can get an honest contrast of what the MIG versus TIG weld actually looks like. Alright guys, let's MIG up this center section here. This piece is getting hot. Alright guys, well I can't find a wire brush, but you should be able to get an idea based upon what I did. So what you're going to be looking at on this piece here is you're going to be looking at a TIG weld while dabbing wire, a MIG weld, and then a TIG weld with lay wire. Hopefully you'll be able to see the difference well enough. Maybe just grab it a different way here. Alright, so over here you have a TIG weld with dabbing wire, and you can see how small that weld is, how much material it didn't add to the weld. In the middle right here is a MIG weld. Now this was MIG welded, wire speed 6 and voltage 9 on a Miller 211. Whatever that equates to, I don't know, but that's basically it. So you can see how much material is actually there. And then the third weld on this side here is what they call the lay wire technique. In the lay wire technique, I just left a 3/32 wire in there. I went over it with the torch and welded it. So you can see the difference between TIG, dab wire, MIG, and then lay wire. Huge difference. Huge, huge difference. So, now that you've seen the differences in how they weld, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of advice because I get this question a lot. Now, the question I get constantly is, Justin, I'm looking to start learning how to weld. What should I do? Should I buy a TIG welder? Should I buy a MIG welder? And you know what? That question is kind of a loaded question. It's hard to answer. Because if your main thing is welding 1/4-inch steel plate like these guys here, by all means get a MIG welder. Learn how to stick metal together. You'll be great. Like I said, you can buy now a Lincoln entry-level Lincoln welder for $300, $200-300, and it's an amazing welder. Or you can go to Harbor Freight and spend even less. So if you're going to be doing the majority of this stuff, then by all means get a MIG. If you plan on doing exhaust piping, intercooler piping, aluminum, things of that nature, don't waste your money on a MIG. Go right for a TIG. Learn how to weld TIG welder style. There's tons of stuff on YouTube. I literally in every one of these videos will praise Jody from weldingtipsandtricks.com. The man is an absolute genius. His videos are amazing. His welding skills are absolutely incredible. And I can honestly tell you that for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been watching his videos every time there's a new one out, and I learn something new every time. So he's a good place to start because he gives you not only what you need to get started, intros to TIG welding basics, MIG welding basics. He goes through all the equipment you need. He actually sells 90% of the stuff that you need to get started in TIG welding. So check him out. I'll put his link in his channel link to his channel in the description below. But short of making this video long as shit, it's already about 24-ish minutes. Those are the main differences. You can get nice welds with both. You can see with the MIG, the weld on this still has dimes. It's not quite a TIG weld. It doesn't have the pretty colors, but it's still got dimes. So if you want to lay dimes with a MIG welder, no problem. You want to lay dimes with a TIG welder, no problem. The TIG welder is going to look a lot better. It may be a little bit stronger because you can exactly and precisely control the heat with the foot pedal and the amount of wire that you add in. So that's the majority of it. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to put them down in the description. We'll do more in the future with this, but these videos are long, and I don't know how long you guys are willing to watch these things, so I like to try to keep them somewhat short. But if you enjoyed, please hit that like button. If you enjoy my content, please hit subscribe. It helps. Every bit helps. I appreciate every single one of you guys. Thank you so much for watching my videos. Have yourselves a wonderful evening, and I will see you this week sometime. Thanks.